Hello, this is Ms. DB. In this video, we are going to continue our work for factoring by grouping. There's another video explaining how to do the first part of the worksheet, 1 through 15. So I'm going to move down to the next part, which is factoring not a 4-term, because usually when you factor by grouping, you're thinking about 1, 2, 3, 4 term in your polynomial. We're going to look at how to factor trinomials, which only have 3 terms. So we've already looked at factoring a problem like x squared plus 1x minus 12 using the method where you look at the factors of negative 12 and find the factors that add up to the middle term. Now we're going to look at another method using grouping. And the reason we're doing this is because if there is not a number in front of the x squared term, then factoring by grouping you may like better than the other method, which is kind of trial and error using your best judgment in order to factor those. So it's not really that hard to factor x squared plus 1x minus 12 using the method you've learned already, but this is another method and it works very well. So let's walk through the process here using x squared plus 1x minus 12 as our example and following these steps that will work for any of your problems, including the next lesson where you will have a number besides 1 for a. All right, first thing to do is to check for common factors. So that means, is there something that I could factor out of each term? In this example, there is no common factor, so I move to step 2. Multiply a times c. Remember, a is the number in front of the x squared term, c is the last term. So in my problem, a is 1, so I have 1 times negative 12, which is negative 12. Next, find the factors that factors of AC, so in this case of negative 12, that add up to b, your middle term. So our factors of negative 12 are 1 times negative 12, that's equal to negative 12, 2 times negative 6, 3 times negative 4, and then the opposite signs for each, negative 1 times 12, negative 2 times 6, and negative 3 times 4. Now we're going to add those and see which ones add up to the middle term. So very similar to what we did before, and you will see that the ones that add up to the middle term of 1 are negative 3 plus 4. Now, I do want to point out here that this often would have been written as x squared plus x minus 12. It's up to you to recognize that there could be a 1 in front of any term that does not have a number. You can put a 1 there. So what we're trying to add up to is the 1. So negative 3 plus 4 equals 1 are the factors to use. Okay, here's the key for factoring by grouping, because up to now this is pretty similar to what we did before. We are going to rewrite the middle term into the sum of 2 terms using the new factors, including the signs. This is just a hint, it's not a rule. If you have one negative, put it first. It'll make the next couple steps a little easier. So I do have a negative. I have a negative 3, so I'm going to rewrite 1x as negative 3x plus 4x. That's true, right? 1x is equal to negative 3x plus 4x. So my new polynomial, I keep the first term the same, x squared minus 3x plus 4x minus 12. I took a 3-term trinomial or quadratic and I turned it into a 4-term polynomial. Next, we factor by grouping the same as you've done on the rest of this worksheet. We put parentheses around the first 2 terms and parentheses around the last 2 terms. If it's a plus, it makes it easier to factor. If it's a minus here, we have to change this sign, but it's a plus. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the next step. I'm going to factor each group by finding the greatest common factor. So in x squared minus 3x, the greatest common factor is x. In 4x minus 12, the greatest common factor is 4. I factor each set of parentheses just like you did on the rest of the worksheet, and I would get this. X is pulled out of the first one, x times x minus 3. For the second one, the greatest common factor was 4, and I get x minus 3. Note the common binomial in each of these now. If you did this correctly, that's going to happen. You're going to get the same thing in the parentheses for each, which means then that you can factor out that common binomial and put it in the front. And then x plus 4 is what's left. Here's the x. plus 4, you write what's left in the other parentheses. So this all factors to x minus 3 times x minus 4. And then I really should have wrote step 8, check, and you can check with FOIL, or if you prefer the table, or, whoa, I hit a button on my keyboard while I was writing. Move back up. There we go. So you can check with FOIL or the other methods for multiplying binomials. And you should get what you started with, x squared plus 1x minus 12. If you don't, then start over. Fix it. So it's not that hard of a process, but let's just do a couple to practice. Let's do number 19. X squared plus 5x plus 6. So the process is, and you can look back at the table as much as you need to, but we are going to first check for common factors, and then find a times c, and then find the factors of a times c that equal the middle term of b. So there's no common factors in number 19. A is 1, so 1 times c, 1 times 6 is equal to 6. I need the factors of 6 that would add up to 5. And probably pretty quickly you can see that 2 times 3 is equal to 6, and 2 plus 3 equals 5. So these are my factors that I want to rewrite 5x as. So 5x would be equal to 2x plus 3x. And that's what I'm going to rewrite my middle term as. So we're turning this into a problem that has 4 terms instead of 3 by rewriting the middle term. This one, there's no negative, so it doesn't matter which order I do. And then I put parentheses around the first 2 terms and around the last 2 terms. Because this sign is a plus, I don't have to worry about any negatives. Now I look for the greatest common factor in each set of parentheses. In the first one, I can see that it's x, because x squared is x times x, and 2x is 2 times x. X is the only common factor. If I take x squared and divide it by x, which is the same as factoring out an x, I get x. If I take 2x and divide it by x, I'm just left with the 2. Now I move to the second set of parentheses, and I think, what is the greatest common factor of 3x and 6? Well, 6 is 3 times 2, so the greatest common factor is 3. So I write that in front, and then I do 3x divided by 3, well, that's just x, and then 6 divided by 3, that's 2. Now I have a common binomial. X plus 2 is the same in both of these, so I can put that in front. I can factor out the common binomial. In the other set of parentheses, you put what's left after you factor out that common binomial, which is x plus 3. And then you check with FOIL. And I'll just check kind of in my head. X times x is x squared. Yep. The outer would be 3x, and the inner would be 2x. 3x plus 2x is 5x. That checks. And then the last times last, 2 times 3 is 6. So it checks. So x plus 2 times x plus 3. Make sure you show your work on these, or you're not going to get credit. And show your work by factoring, by grouping. We're practicing this so that when we do the next worksheet, it's not so hard. I want to do one with some negatives in it to show you what happens. Let's see. Let's try 21. All right, so the first step is to see if there's anything common that you can factor out, and there isn't. And then I take the first term times the last term, and I find the factors of that would add up to negative 5. So the factors of negative 14, 7 times 2, but one of them has to be negative. I need the 7 to be negative, because that way I would get a negative 5 when I add them. Negative 7 plus 2 is negative 5. So I'm going to rewrite negative 5x as negative 7x plus 2x. Or, I just want to show you what happens if you have the negative 2x minus 7x. I'm going to write it this way so that I have to work with it a little bit. X squared plus 2x minus 7x minus 14. So that's equivalent expression to what we started with. Now I'm going to put the parentheses. X squared plus 2x is no big deal to put those parentheses. But when you put the parentheses for the negative, you have to change, you're factoring out a negative. I wonder if it would be, yeah, I'm just going to do it. So there's the minus sign. There's the 7x. But this has to be a plus 14. Because when you multiply this back, you'd have negative 7x, yep, okay, and then you'd have negative 14. If you had put a minus sign here, a negative times negative would be plus, and you would not have the same thing that you started with. So be very careful when there's a negative. That's why I said if there's only one negative, it's easier to put it first. So it would have been easier to write this as this one. All right, so now I factor out what's common in both. And this is exactly the same as number 19. So when I factor out an x, I get x plus 2. Now here, I have a minus sign, and then you figure out what's common in both. It's a 7, and then I would have x plus 2. So you can finish this. You'll see you have a common binomial. If I had put a minus sign here, I would not have a common binomial. And then you could stop and say, oh, wait, there's something wrong. I need to look back at my negatives. All right, I'll stop there. Let me know if you have any questions or if you want to work on this together. Thank you very much.